Welcome to Simple Conversations with ASG.
So tell me, who is David Hayes?
David Hayes is currently a forensic psychologist and criminologist working in prison education, cold cases, and some adult education fields currently, as well as still dabbling in the entertainment world as a screenwriter and novelist. And he's quite handsome, if you're listening.
I can confirm. What What's annoying you this week, David?
Oh, wow. What's annoying me this week is we're in the United States. I'm in the United States, of course, and we're celebrating our Thanksgiving holiday coming up. And the Thanksgiving holiday is essentially a giant cultural lie that really annoys me because it's predicated on the idea that settlers from England came and made nice with the native populations and had a wonderful meal and traded ideas and things. And it really was just a bunch of settlers coming in and dominating indigenous people and essentially ruining their lives and taking their land. So our celebration is for this. It's not going to stop me from eating too much because I have to assimilate and fit in with my culture. But yes, that's currently my annoyance of the week.
Yeah, I forgot about Thanksgiving. I knew it exists by now. I don't know the date, like I'm not that familiar, but I've been trying to batch book guests for the next few weeks so I can record, and then
Hmm.
when it comes to Christmas, forget that I ever had a podcast. But I sent it out to a few guys. I had one guy in particular who's a singer. He made a Super Bowl song, but I asked him if he could do in between these dates because it was the only time I really had free, and he just wrote back, "Thanksgiving equals drunk." I
It's
forgot
true.
all about it. He was so right. Felt like such a dick.
Thanksgiving does. Oh, I mean, please don't, because my annoyance means I want you to be annoyed with Thanksgiving and forget about it. But so that's where we're at with it. It's I joke with people about how this we all schools will put on Thanksgiving pageants with this wonderful the pilgrims at Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts making friends with the indigenous tribes, and they had all these wonderful meals laid out together when it really is just about smallpox blankets and taking over land and completely taking advantage of a group of people that didn't have a word for personal ownership in their language.
Yeah, something tells me if you went by that raw definition, there wouldn't be a lot of turkey being given out or beers being drank. To be honest, I think there'd be more
There would.
tissues in front of an open fire trying to console each other.
There was probably, it's the States. There's still going to be beer and overeating. So, we can't give up too many things.
Right, we need to try and switch gears here because this conversation is going to be very different to celebrating and Thanksgiving, to be honest. So
Well, it
let me
might.
let me try and figure out where I can go from here. So
Sure.
people's going to hear those two titles you have of
Mhm.
forensic psychologist and criminology, and they're going to get a little bit spooked because to me it spooked
Okay.
me a little bit too because you can tell what world it's in. You can tell it's in the world of crime and cases and stuff, but it does sound a little
Mhm.
bit harsh. Can you give a little bit of an idiot definition of what those are?
So they it goes into two different areas really. So like the idea of forensic psychologist is really broad. It's huge. So it's anything where um, the science of psychology interacts with criminal justice world. So wherever that happens. So it could be, counseling a police officer with mental health issues. It could be deciding or doing some tests to see if someone's fit for trial. It goes all the way to looking at criminal behavior in terms of a crime and trying to figure out who it is. So there's lots of areas for it. It kind of narrows into the idea of criminologist, and a criminologist as opposed to a criminalist. So a criminalist is that forensics person, the science and the math and the things I don't know anything about. And the criminologist is someone who looks at essentially criminal behavior, criminal trends, and goes into like predictive models of it.
Have you ever watched the TV show Mindhunter?
I have.
Are you basically one of those people?
So Mindhunter could have been on my annoying things of the week too.
Fuck's sake.
So Mindhunter is loosely based off of the work that the FBI did, the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the States, in the early 1970s, where they kind of developed this idea of serial predators and who is doing what, and forming these models. And although groundbreaking at the time, it's kind of resulted in some misinformation, and really that's persisted over the course of decades. And what they did, and in Mindhunter, you can see how they build these profiles and how they put these together. And what's accurate within Mindhunter, the show, and the real life Douglas and Wrestler who did this were, the fact that they kind of used some pretty bad science. The science wasn't there. The scientific method wasn't there. And so we now are living with the perception of like serial predators are all like super genius white males. And it's not true, but that's the only people they talk to then. So that's the only pool that happened. So yeah, Mindhunter, wonderful presentation. I think I like anything that's going to expand on the idea and the reach of criminology and forensic psychology, and loosely the term criminal profiler. But I also uh, really don't like the continuation of misinformation.
Yeah, I think any kind of recreation show is going to have a lot of inaccuracies, because I don't know how anyone could accurately make a recreation without the people involved directly being involved, which I don't think anything. I don't think Netflix is going to do that. They're going to probably think that their
Mhm.
directors are the best.
So I mean, that's part of it, but the also is like the misinformation started in real life with the science from the FBI, and then it's perpetuated again in the TV show. So they're not going to. I mean, that's accurate. They're accurately reporting what they did, which was off. If that makes any sense. So, but it's and that's just something that we've been battling for years and years and years, really. And and some of the things we discussed earlier that we're going to talk about, that idea of that misinformation really persists. And it sells now too. So as a self-avowed true crime addict, like you mentioned before we started, there's lots of you out there. But then to perpetuate people watching true crime and people still involved with it, we have to have that interest level there. And the interest level is the sexy, strange stuff. The serial killers who are not common. It is not a common thing, but it is everywhere because that's what people are looking for. They want the strangest and the it's kind of like a horror movie where you want the scariest part of it because you're really safe in your area watching it.
Have you been able to use that to your advantage when you're uh, screenwriting? You know the facts, but then you also know what sells, so you can build a middle ground and kind of bridge it together.
Well, I'm really terrible at doing what sells historically, so
I'm the
just
same.
as a caveat. But so my psychology adventure started because I wanted a better grasp of human behavior to begin with. And so that's when I was at a university and creating their film program there. And then I started to take the psychology classes, and everything just went crazy from there as just a way to inform myself. But when I think the most important thing is that not only do we have like character behavior and we're able to map that, and we'll be able to accurately um, uh, convey that in the film, we can also put together the film and the screenplay and the movie in a way where we can sort of predict that audience reaction too, because audience behavior is the same thing. We have to take all these different levels of behavior into account: the fictional characters, of course, but then the real life audiences and how those will potentially react. So it's really kind of a nice synthesis of the two as far as the film world's concerned.
Have you ever done any studies on like specific criminals to find out how they work? Maybe they've done something a little bit out of the ordinary.
If you are enjoying this episode, follow and rate the show.
Not specific studies on criminals, but we've uh, been a part of like larger studies on just generalized criminal behavior. And I do a lot of work in the prison systems in the States. So I teach within the prison systems, and I talk to murderers every day. And how they get to where they're at varies greatly. And a lot of this is going to be based on a kind of a structuralist aspect. So, um, in I ascribe to a couple of different areas within psychology as like a behavioralist and a structuralist. So this idea that um, behavior is comprised of many different things, not the least of which is responses to social structures. So, for example, if you live in a community, and then within that community, for generations and generations, you're expected to engage in criminal behavior. That's just your norm. That's the baseline. You're going to live up to those family expectations and those social expectations because you don't want to be ostracized from your in group. You don't want to be blackballed from the family or the group, or put aside. So you'll continue to engage in that, and it works the same way when I, have a class of police officers, and I'll ask them, so what did your father do? And my father's a police officer. What'd your grandfather do? My grandfather was a police officer. What if you wanted to be a baker? And they're like, well, no, I couldn't do that. It's the same thing. So you can see like societal structures and what's accepted and what's not accepted, kind of put that together in many instances. And then you look at something so outside the norm. So say like a serial killer, like if you grow up in a family that are killing people, that doesn't really happen, right? You're not going to have that hand me down from them. So where does that happen? And there's no definite answers. There's no definite answers, but most of the time we want to look at these in terms of how an individual person is built, and then remember that the act of killing someone, the act of murder, is a choice. After that, a lot of people have the same terrible situations, for example, that like a Ted Bundy would come from, but Ted Bundy chose to act on it in this manner. And there are various like personality disorders that ascribe to it. The and like we talked about before, all that misinformation doesn't help either. So many people believe that the serial killer just can't stop, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And well, no, that's not true. They can stop. It's a choice. There's not these horrible urges, this addiction, for example, to killing people. It's gets down to different factors, different catalysts, social and political structures, combined with personality disorders, maybe chemical imbalances, and all these things will interweave and combine to create any of our choices. So we're all making these choices every day. They're just choosing to go in that direction.
Yeah, that choice has always fascinated me because I think anybody living will know people that they are angry people. They'll go to the point of fighting someone or threatening someone. They'll never
Hmm.
really go above that. And it's always fascinated me what that small little like trait or behavioral instinct is that pushes those criminals past that point of I'm angry at someone to I want to do something highly illegal and just finish them off here.
It's fascinating, and so I think it varies for everyone, but I think what it all it's going to relate to is this idea of your ability to control your environment. For example, if you have very little control over your daily life, like you go to work and you're told what to do all day, you come home and you're told what to do. You don't get to choose this. Your financial circumstances don't allow you to buy the things you want, or maybe even live up to the standard you think that you're supposed to be. We just had a really contentious election in the United States, and a lot of that was about, a person's lack of control over their daily lives and their world results in who they're going to vote for example. So if you have very little control, then you're constantly looking to exert control over something else. And if there's no real outlets for that control, if there are things that you can't exert that control in, like many people have hobbies, for example, or they do theater or whatever it is that lets them have some sort of control over the world, depending on a personality disorder or chemical imbalance or whatever could be wrong with them in the normal quote unquote type of makeup, they'll choose to exert that control in the ultimate way. And you know, killing someone is the ultimate level of control and power. So we see that with people who are serial rapists, for example. A lot of times it's not about the sex act, it's about the control and the power. And when you exert that control and that power, that charges you up, that makes you feel good. I worked on a case where the person who was arrested did actually, commit multiple murders, and said in an interview that once he did that, once he killed somebody, he was charged up. He was powerful, and his daily life didn't give him that at all. So there's this point of deviancy that we can't really pinpoint that's allowing people to make that choice to go that far. But again, it's a conglomeration of different kind of facets, but I think it all relates to control.
Yeah, a lot of these criminals that will do something, they'll always say something pushed them to that point. How often do you see criminals that accept accountability for what they've done and they've said, I've done this because whatever reason?
So in my work in the prisons, I see that a lot, where it's just like, yep, did it. The reasoning for why is not always clear. I don't think they always know what the reasoning for why is, and I'm not in like a therapeutic talking with a client, sort of thing with them. So we don't talk about our dreams and decide how we got someplace. So, but the accountability is usually there. And that's very interesting to me. So I didn't expect that prior to working with this population for over these years, but the accountability is there, and they're equally as unsure as to why that point snapped too, because most of the people in at least the and I assume worldwide prisons are reasonable human beings that made an incredibly horrible decision on an incredibly bad day. And they just made this terrible decision that's affected them for the rest of their lives, maybe ended somebody else's life, affected families, forever. And I think that most of the people that I deal with take accountability for it. Sometimes it was in, the commission of an act. We see a lot of horrible crimes happen under the influence of different drugs and alcohol. Addiction and things related to addiction are probably the biggest progenitor of criminal activity, like violent criminal activity worldwide, I would assume. And there's studies, of course, I just didn't look any of them up. So I'm saying I assume, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But so I'll talk to someone who, for example, trying to think of a good one here, or not good, interesting one. Good and fun are the bad words.
Good is not a good description of it.
I actually did a little bit of a case study for a different show, and there was a woman who put her baby in an oven and then cooked the child, and she said that it was an accident. And so, and of course, everyone's yelling, no, you did it on purpose, you did it on purpose. Well, it turns out, yes, she did do it on purpose, but there's kind of precedent too for these atrocious things happening. I'm only bringing this up because there's so many different layers to different things. But there were cases of women who were having epileptic episodes, and not a seizure, but an episode where they would mistakenly put their child on the stove and a tea kettle in a bassinet. And so, it was just this transposing of things. In this particular case, this woman was, engaging in some illicit drug use, some hardcore things, also suffering from postpartum psychosis, not depression, psychosis, which is a far it's more of a kind of like a psychotic break because of it, and was incredibly jealous of the child based on her social media, that there was now a baby getting the attention that she never got. And so this led to this break, largely induced with narcotic usage, and so resulted in a horrible tragedy, that the woman made the choice to do on purpose, but there were these mitigating circumstances, and a lot of it results in, like I said, because this conglomeration of things. So growing up not being the center of attention, or not having anyone pay attention to her, or the child taking the what little attention there was away, probably a lack of control over, now being a single mother, drug use, postpartum psychosis. So we have a real mental issue, and then drug use. So it's these perfect storms of things that can all combine to make something terrible happen.
Yeah, it's wild. It's going to take a little bit to digest, so I might have nightmares tonight. Thanks for that, David. But
Well, it's my job, one of my jobs.
yeah, so we've touched on like their environment will
Hmm.
impact it, and you've mentioned that there's some of them that are under the influence of something. Do you think that they're maybe trying drugs and excessive alcohol to numb that trauma or that potential decision being made, and it's just not working, so they've just gave on?
So that's an interesting thing. So you'll talk. So my mentor um, worked on the Jeffrey Dahmer case. He's been all over the place. He worked at Unabomber. He worked on all these big things, and he related how, like Dahmer, for example, would try and get really inebriated to stop these urges. When in all reality, was it in all reality, the being inebriated probably left him more open to doing
Yeah, he was
the,
going to
the terrible
bars,
things.
wasn't he?
Right, he's going into bars, and just to be really drunk. And we see substance abuse as, at least some sort of substance usage as a part of most, just like serial sexual predator murders. We see, there's some kind of drug use going on. I think Bundy did as well. Some, it's not all the time, of course. Again, these things vary at where they're at. But yeah, I mean, it could conceivably be that someone's trying to, dull trauma, and in dulling that trauma, they're opening themselves up to even making poorer decisions than they would normally.
Yeah. Even with your expert knowledge and stuff, has there ever been a situation or a person in specific you really struggled to analyze or study? There didn't seem to be anything that should have provoked them.
No, I mean, not really. I mean, I have the same biases as other people, so nothing in that sense. But I know that if I walk into a situation where I'm dealing with someone who is, for example, like child exploitation, that's something that like really gets to me, and it gets to anything. It's not like anything new, that's what it should get to people. And so if someone is accused of this or they're in prison on this, I have to like really step back and take care of my own biases in that regard, and not try and vilify this person just immediately right off the bat, because I have to be as clinical as I possibly can in dealing with them. Even if I, from that sense, or even if I have them in a class, I'm going to know who's done what. And so that's probably the hardest thing for me. So it's not an analyzing somebody else sort of thing. If they're being honest, if someone's not being honest and they're closed off and you're not getting the information you need, of course that's going to be difficult. But it's more of a case that I'm the difficult one, and I have to police myself prior to going in.
Yeah, you have to almost remove emotion from the situation from your point of view.
Right. Yep. The emotion part of it, the preconceived notion part of it, the yeah, and that's really the only situation where I have trouble is in the kid stuff.
How do you do that? Because you mentioned earlier you're dealing with murders and stuff every day, and
Mhm.
there must be some that have done some sick things. How do you get yourself to that point where you can be non-biased?
So, I mean, at the very baseline, there's connective tissue between everybody. So there's this fun communication and psychology theory called the identification theory, which means that we have identification points with everybody. You can we're even the most terrible criminal and the most beautiful angelic person are more alike than they're different. And I try and ascribe to kind of to that aspect of it, where okay, so we're all human. There we are, boom, baseline. All the same species. Um, most of the time, like I said before, it's someone who's just made these horrible decisions on a couple of bad days, and that's just your normal everyday crime stuff. When you get to the stranger things, I have to remember that for someone to get to a point where they're going to choose to, for example, commit multiple murders, they know first and foremost that they're going to be breaking the law. It's not like no one knows this. They know that when it's found out, they will be ostracized. They know that their family will probably hate them. If they care about somebody, that person will probably leave them. So I have to like get myself to the point where I'm thinking, okay, this person has gone through something, or there's some problem, or there's some reason where they're going to make all these choices to actively ruin their lives, and every victims' lives too, and their families' lives, but also actively ruin their lives. And so that's kind of where I get it. Like, all right, let's find out what that is. And if I look at it in terms of, not a puzzle is the wrong term, but more in terms of, if I can find like what the foundational aspects of that decision were, then that lets me get a little bit more clinical about it. Like, yeah, it's a real person. Yeah, it's a real human. Yeah, they did horrible things that affected many other people. But we do have this central research question. And the central research question is going to allow me to explore, and that can hopefully help someone in the end, is really where we get to it. Can I help families? Can I help this person? Can we get closure on other things? So wherever that we can pay it forward is kind of the what I keep in mind.
As someone who watches a lot of true crime, I can see whenever I see someone doing something to someone they know or someone they supposed to love, someone in their life, it's not that I can understand them, but I can see the concept of the situation. I can kind of understand how they've went from point A to point B. The ones that do things to people they don't know is the one that kind of freaks me out a little bit. Like the two people we've mentioned, Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy. What
Hmm.
is it that's different from those people who can commit crimes on what seems to be unassociated civilians to the ones that do it on their own loved ones?
I think it goes back to this idea of control. So if you are targeting people you don't know and choosing that, you want to perpetuate the behavior. You want this is a continuing thing. In the Dahmer case, though, he did get to know some of these people. He dated them. In terms of Dahmer's, it's just a tragic case,
Crazy.
because he was crazy, and what he did was terrible. But there was so much that he could not control in his life, and he was abandoned so many times in different areas, that the entire purpose of this was to make some like forever friends that would never leave, which is terrifying to begin with, and then also so incredibly pathetic.
Yeah.
And then the substance abuse and all these
Yeah.
things continue to do it. um Bundy, on the other hand, was targeting prey like a hunter, and exacting control. So they were both looking for control of something. Dahmer in control of relationships, and control of people abandoning him, and control of companionship, and then Bunny in control of power. And so I think that if one of Dahmer's experiments would have worked, then if he made a zombie that would live with him forever, then they would have stopped. That need would have been fulfilled. But I don't think
Yeah.
Bundy would ever stop, because he's continually looking for the idea of power and control. And then we go to someone who's a loved one, then your reasoning's different at that point. So if we can take out the idea of like killing somebody for money, or like you're going to kill your parents because you want the inheritance, or you're getting a horrible divorce and you think the only way out is killing somebody, or you're a kid and you're all wrapped up in whatever lifestyle you decide to, and you take out your brothers and sisters, whatever it is, the people that you know. It still goes back to control. If someone's killing their parents for money, they feel they have zero control over their lives and they want that inheritance so they can have their life move forward. If you're trying to get out of a horrible marriage, that's control. So it always goes back to this idea of power and control, and having that manifest destiny for yourself. So, and it'll come up in different levels too. Not everybody, of course, hires a hitman to kill their husband. Some people simply just get divorced, and end it. So we'd have to talk to these people individually and see where did this trauma come from, and why did you choose this level of it? And we can see how it's built once we get into these conversations and get specific. But I think everything really kind of goes back to the idea of their locus of control and how much they have in their life.
You mentioned obviously that you're now in a way teaching these criminals now things, or you're in some sort of like tutoring scheme. How open are they to learning about something new?
Absolutely 100%. So I mean, I don't have, this isn't, in the United States, it's not available to everybody. So you have to have some behaviors within prison. You have to qualify for different programs. I teach in a university program. So I'll teach psychology or English, whatever class I have, for for these groups of students, and they're like regular psychology and English classes, like you would have at university wherever. And but like, to a person, they're really open to learning new things. And I think a lot of, so when we see, in at least in the United States, the prison populations are filled with people who normally didn't have the privilege to either the privilege or the social structure wasn't there to continue an education, or to move forward in an education, or to have the idea of education in some form change their lives, in some manner. There's many social areas and demographics where like a high school education is a given, or even through a primary education is a given. And if that doesn't happen, then it's really hard for someone to see the value of it too. So I think that, so we know, like, for example, someone who has high self-esteem when they're in prison, when they leave, there's less recidivism. So there's less crime they commit outside of prison once they're gone. And we know that, like, really the only statistical way to raise that self-esteem in prison is education. So the from a prisoner standpoint, yeah, really into it. Know that this is something that can be life changing. And it's not just a piece of paper at that point. It's experiencing these different areas and these different points of view. And then we know that when someone's outside of prison, once they leave, then this is a way for them to stay out of prison subsequently. So yeah, I mean, it's and I'll run through everything. So I'll have a class with people with drunk driving charges, all the way to maybe a serial killer. So that it's a very open class, or if someone qualifies.
I want to touch on something here that I read about today that there's been a real uproar about, and I want to kind of link in your two areas of knowledge here with being able to screenwrite and obviously knowing a lot about the behaviours and criminals and things like that. There's been a lot of uproar about the Monsters TV series not being accurate and like making people look worse than they were. And I've seen that there's a lot now about the Zodiac documentary as well, where there's a lot of people having a lot of backlash saying that they've twisted things and they left stuff out. Is there a reason things can't be completely accurate?
No,
No.
there isn't a reason why it can't be completely accurate. I don't know
So they
how much.
could make it accurate if they wanted to, but they just choose not to.
Someone could make it accurate, yes. Now, it's interesting though. So, and the people complaining, are they? This is where things get a little weird in persuasion and crime and all these things. Are the people complaining about the things they don't believe happened, or are they complaining about factual inaccuracies? So if you
Yeah.
have a belief set and like, okay, this is the guy, and the documentary is about another guy, well, that's inaccurate. And so are we looking at it that way? But again, we have to remember here. So like documentaries and true crime media and all of that, and this is like a lot of what my dissertation was on. I did a study on whether or not homicide investigators were influenced by true crime, and I used the Ted Bundy case, and I watched an ungodly amount of Ted Bundy media, and I developed a survey based off of that to kind of see, all right, what does a homicide investigator believe? Do they reject the myths? Do they reject the stereotypes? All the things that are inaccurate in these pieces of media? And the document said, or the end of the study eventually came out that the homicide investigators largely believe the same things that everyone else believes because they don't run into this type of crime very often. So it's not like they have like real world knowledge of it. So it's kind of like it's there are a couple of areas like in terms of psychopathy and other things where they rejected the stereotypes, but overall they kind of bought into this idea of the stereotype of, for example, for the serial murder, quote unquote. And so what we're left with here is, okay, so we've got this large batch of media that tons and tons of people are interested in. And the only thing it's beholden to is the ratings of that media, the clicks, the downloads, and the money that it makes. Because there isn't you don't have to just to say something's a documentary. You can just say it. Like right now, I could tell you a wonderful story about how I built the White House in Washington D.C. and I'll say it's a documentary. And it's totally true, and I don't have to back it up. I can just say it. And that's kind of where we're at here. So we know, like, are you familiar with the case of Ed Gein?
No, but I've heard his name.
Right, 1950s in Wisconsin, in the States, and he was mainly a ghoul. He killed one person for sure. We think his mom, and then he largely just dug people up and made furniture from their bodies and like skin and things, made clothes and stuff. Like I'm saying it like it's just,
Nothing
oh yeah,
extra. Just
nothing weird, just that. And, and but you'd see like, okay, that one true crime story was the basis for Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They both say based on a true story, based off of this, two completely disparate versions, both inaccurate to the real story, but we can say anything is based on a true story. Because there's not it's not like a law, it's just one of those unwritten rules of documentary, right? And if we perpetuate myths like that, then it's an interesting thing. There's actually a great theory called the agenda setting theory, where it's in communication, and it doesn't tell people what to think; it just tells people what to think about. So if I'm out doing a talk and I've got a large group of people, and the people in the true crime talks are going to be largely Caucasian women. Caucasian women, the biggest consumers of true crime media. And I'll ask them in the talk, all right, so who do you think is the most at risk population of people? And they'll be like, Caucasian women, white women, everything we watch, there's white women being attacked. I'm like, yeah, it's true. Y'all relatively safe. It's generally black men. Black men are the most likely to die in a crime. After that, it's white men because men do stupid things to one another and they make terrible choices. White women are relatively safe. But since they're the largest consumer of this media, they're going to be the focal point. We'll go back to identification theory. If I can identify it with the victim and I get scared watching my show, I'm going to watch another show because I'm scared in the safety of my home. And Aristotle is telling me that the cathartic response is my rush and my feelings for escaping near death in the comfort of my couch, and our media tells us that we're going to come back to it. So what we're left with is this idea that, okay, um, is it accurate? No, no. Most documentaries, not accurate at all. They don't have an agenda. The only agenda is to perpetuate that documentary and then make the next one.
Have you ever watched a documentary called The Jinx?
The Jinx. No, that sounds wonderful. What's it
It
about?
it's about a murder case that was kind of never solved, but there was a guy in particular they were interviewing, and for this specific guy, they hired a professional interviewer because they said the people investigating the case couldn't get him to answer anything that sounded like he was in any way related to this case. Yet he knew the victims, knew the people that were suspects, couldn't get any answer linking him at all. So they got this interviewer in, and he was playing hypothetical games with them the whole time. So he was making a hypothetical question, basing it loosely on what actually happened. And the
Hmm.
guy was, again, flawless, incredible, didn't say anything that sounded anything like it. But he got up and he went, "Can I have a break? I want to go to the toilet. I want to get something to eat." So they were like, "Yep, no problem." And the interviewer turned around and goes, "Keep his mic on because there's something he's not telling us." And while he was on the toilet, you can hear him talking to himself saying, "That was close. Can't believe those detectives didn't question that because you've just got away with murder." And they stormed the bathroom and they were like, "That is so stupid," because they went then and asked the people who investigated it, and they said they had read blog posts from people who were close to the suspects and knew the victims, but not enough to be close to them. And they were influenced by it, so they didn't ask him any harsh questions. And this interviewer hypothetically put him into a confession.
Nice. So, yeah, I mean, that, when we get into this idea of investigation too, um, the police are absolutely human. If they have a different, like, the idea of tunnel vision is really difficult too. So if anyone gets just narrowed in on a certain suspect, they're gonna block everything else out and kind of focus on it. I did watch, I think, the Zodiac one you're talking about with um, the kids, and they're older now, and they're doing
Yeah.
the interview about how they, yeah. That's an interesting one. So Arthur Allen, the Zodiac has been like a really, it's been something that I've uh, dabbled in as well. I'm a big fan of the criminal humanities, so looking at like the writings of people and the media output of people, and trying to determine behavioral aspects from what they've written and what they put out there. And of course, the Zodiac ciphers and letters are fascinating. But yeah, so the Arthur Allen idea has been around for a really long time, and I know. I mean, I don't know everything. Of course, I haven't seen case files, and like everybody else, I've seen what media has allowed me to see. 'Cause remember, everything's edited too. There's a distinct storyline happening in a documentary. It's not just straight information. It'd be a brochure at that point. And but so it's I could see where that particular um, story, if true, would be a powerful indicator that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac, if it were true. That's where we're left.
You mentioned the human aspect of the police, and we touched on it earlier about how they they do have like support on their mental health and stuff. And
Hmm.
something that's hugely in the spotlight now is it's almost under a microscope is whatever the police do. Pretty much they have to toe
Right.
a very straight line. Do you think the police in general could benefit from a little bit more focus on their mental state?
I think everyone could. Period. And at least in the United States, where mental health crises are still kind of reviled and looked at with like weakness, as which I don't think is a true thing. But we're looking at when we look at police and we look at military and we look at any industry, they're kind of a closed system, right? And when they close ranks like that, it's sort of protective. So we really don't get to see deeply inside there. But I think that we could benefit just overall from better mental health approaches, and maybe, and it's gotten better over the years. I'm pretty old now, and I could remember how terrible it was before, and now we're actually at least talking about it, just even insofar as men's mental health, which has been largely shoved to the side for a few hundred years. You're not supposed to have problems. You're not supposed to be like that. There's you should be, rub some dirt on it and walk it off. And it doesn't really happen like that all the time. But yeah, I think we are benefiting from that. I think police are benefiting from in a lot of different areas. And I also largely believe that, there's many times where people will look at a police investigation and say they're not doing anything. And I don't think that's accurate. I think that most of the time, vast majority of the time, police are actually doing their job and working diligently to find something. They're not talking about anything. They're not showing it, and there may not have anything that can be shown as far as progress is concerned, because some of these things are pretty difficult. But I was asked to give a couple of quotes for two unsolved homicides here. One was, and they were both in the same article, and one was a doctor. He was a gay doctor whose homicide in his own home, very fluent, was not solved yet. And then the other homicide was a black trans woman in a hotel in Detroit, which was going unsolved. And I'm like, okay, so what we're looking at here are two different things, and I think that the organization wanted me to point out how police may not be doing their job, but they're actively, from what I could tell, actively really, pursuing these in whatever ways they can. If we know that an affluent doctor, regardless of sexual preference, was murdered in their home, that's going to be a high profile, perpetrator, someone that you're gonna have to like work on kid gloves with. You don't get into someone's home with that much money and that much affluence, easily. And on the other side, black trans women are really the most likely group to have random violence happen, simply for existing. In the different cultural manifestations, that person who is a man transitioning to a woman in the black community is at risk for violence. So it could literally be, one of those cases where it's random violence, based from cultural predictors. So we've got these two different ideas, and of course, I think the police are working them to the best of their ability. The doctor we can't really talk about, because when that comes out, it's gonna come out big. And when this one is just hard, it could be anyone within this cultural sphere. So, I think that overall police are doing their job, and the speed of how things are solved, and the speed of how information comes out, I think is a large part of media as well. There's this thing called the CSI effect. And the CSI effect is, ever since the CSI TV shows, people believe that, criminal science is in a flash, and DNA can happen instantly. And, everything needs to wrap up in this beautiful 1 hour segment, when it really doesn't.
Yeah, there's unrealistic expectations.
Mhm.
So before I get you to plug whatever you've got going on and take an ad break, you do some work on cold cases, and I wanted to ask you this now. Obviously, don't want specifics, don't want details, all respect to the people involved and stuff. But have you ever been involved in one that was actually solved?
Not actively. No, I've commented on some that have been solved, from different things, but not yet. So still working on that one. But they're really rare. It's sometimes we're dealing with things that are 40 and 50 years old, and I like it in terms of, I know that there, for everyone who is like survives and has a family member that may have been murdered 50 years ago or 40 years ago, or someone's been missing. I think that it's helpful to them to know that people are still working and people still care. And are the chances of solving them are very, very, very slim. Like familial DNA has been wonderful recently, but that's incredibly expensive. And the couple of cases that I've gotten to do some follow up work on that were solved with familial DNA only were solved because there was a grant from a nonprofit that allowed that DNA to be checked. It's not like it's could just throw out there and some places are going to do it for free. So there's a lot of factors that go into the familial DNA, and the other cold cases are really just it's your standard level police work, and it's new eyes every few years, and it's trying to break open these cases with maybe some new information, or maybe something comes to light that didn't happen before. And technology has definitely helped in that regard. But really, it's still this dogged determination. And sadly, a lot of municipalities and organizations don't really fund their cold cases. And whoever's doing it, it's maybe a detective, maybe two, maybe just volunteers who are determined to try and help the victim families and survivors.
I was just about to ask, do you want to plug whatever you're working on? But that sounds so insensitive to ask somebody actively working in crimes. Don't know if I want you
So
to plug your crimes at the moment.
no, I'm not going to tell you any crimes I've done. Oh my
Good,
gosh, it'd be
good.
terrible.
I'll be having that there.
This would be proof.
What about mine? I want to upload this.
I will say that anyone can go to my website at hayescriminology.com, and I will actively help anyone who needs anything. And if there is like a case in your family, or something's not moving forward, I will do whatever I can to try and provide whatever help is possible in terms of that. If you and again, if anyone has questions or anything like that, or if anyone's a student listening and they need anything, I'm there for that as well. But really, there's no, not like I charge money or anything. It's just a process of helping.
Follow your new favorite interviewer with the link in the description.